Autumn light drifted lazily through the tall windows of a modest house on a quiet street in Maplewood. The trees outside were turning amber and red, their branches swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. In the kitchen, the rich smell of fresh coffee rose in soft spirals, mingling with the faint sweetness of cinnamon from the loaf Bethany Collins had baked earlier that morning. She reached for 2 porcelain mugs, arranging them side by side. Her hands moved with a steady calm she sometimes marveled at. Years ago, she could not have imagined a life like this, a life that felt ordinary in all the ways she'd longed for, a life that was free of dread. She heard the creak of floorboards behind her. "Bethany," came Mark's warm voice, carrying the faint rasp of fatigue. "I'm going to have to stay late again tonight." She glanced over her shoulder to see him leaning against the doorway, still wearing his pressed slacks and white shirt from work, his tie loosened just enough to hint at the long day he'd had. "That's all right," she said with a small smile. She poured the coffee and set his cup in front of him. Mark stepped forward and wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat seep into his fingers. He was a tall man with even features, a reassuring presence who never raised his voice, never turned sharp or dismissive. "Thank you," he murmured, touching her knuckles with his thumb. That simple contact was enough to send a current of comfort through her. She had spent so many years bracing herself for disappointment that it still felt unfamiliar to be treated so gently. She looked into his tired eyes and thought, perhaps for the 100th time, that he was the second chance she never believed she deserved. He took a sip and set the cup down. "I promise I'll make it up to you," he said. "This project is almost done." "You don't have to apologize," she replied softly. "I know how hard you work." Even now, she marveled at how different her life had become. 10 years earlier, she'd been married to someone else, a man whose affection had once made her feel invincible, but whose darkness had hollowed her out from the inside. Sometimes she could hardly remember who she'd been back then. She met Tom Miller when she was 20, a college junior studying business administration. He had been a year ahead, tall and bright-eyed, with a laugh that made her stomach flutter. They met at a campus coffee shop, where he had leaned over to ask if he could borrow her pen. 3 weeks later, he asked her to dinner. 6 months after that, he slipped a silver ring onto her finger and whispered that he couldn't imagine his life without her. They married the summer after she graduated. Her parents had worried it was too soon, but she felt sure they were wrong. In the early days, she believed they were the luckiest people alive. Their apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a rust-stained sink, but they didn't care. They fell asleep tangled together, whispering plans for the future. Tom had landed a promising engineering job at a growing firm. They both imagined that in a few years, they'd buy a house, maybe start a family. But life began to chip away at those hopes in small, nearly invisible ways. She first noticed Tom's absences. He would stay late at work, claiming he was under pressure to meet deadlines. He was irritable in a way he never used to be, snapping over small things like misplaced keys or a burned dinner. Still, she loved him, so she made excuses. She told herself he was stressed, that it would pass. One night, she woke up alone in their bed. The clock on the bedside table read 1:12 a.m. She sat up, listening for his key in the lock, but the apartment remained still. When he came home just before dawn, he looked exhausted. She asked him where he'd been, and he only shook his head. "Don't start," he said quietly, before locking himself in the bathroom. Later, she would come to understand that he hadn't been working late at all. He had been gambling. The truth emerged slowly, like a bruise forming beneath skin. She noticed cash withdrawals she didn't recognize, credit card statements with transactions she couldn't explain. Each time she confronted him, he would avert his eyes and say he had it under control. One evening, when she returned home early, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills. He looked up at her as though he'd been caught doing something shameful. "You lost again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't deny it. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I really thought I could win it back." The words were like a cruel echo. He had said them so many times they had become meaningless. He would apologize, swear he would get help, promise he would change. But every promise was followed by another lie, another debt, another night alone wondering how they had ended up there. She tried to hold them together. She took on more hours at work, skipped meals to save money, paid whatever bills she could. But the harder she tried to fix things, the more everything slipped away. When she finally filed for divorce, she felt like she was standing in the wreckage of her own life. She still loved him, but she could not save him. At 25, she moved home to her parents' house, carrying a few boxes of clothes and a grief she didn't know how to name. The years that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful way she had imagined. She worked part-time as a clerk in a small insurance office, where she filed claims and answered phones. At night, she enrolled in bookkeeping classes at the community college. Her world shrank to simple tasks: studying, working, sleeping. Her friends encouraged her to go out, to meet someone, to try again. But she wasn't ready. She didn't know if she ever would be. For a long time, she avoided anything that reminded her of marriage. She stayed away from weddings, stopped watching romantic films. Love seemed like a language she had forgotten how to speak. And then, 2 years before, everything shifted. She almost didn't attend the wedding reception. Her friend Emily had insisted for weeks that she come, promising it would be a small gathering, just close friends. Nothing overwhelming. "You've been working so hard," Emily had said over the phone. "You deserve to have one evening where you don't think about the past." Bethany reluctantly agreed, telling herself she could always leave early if it was too much. The reception was held in a little restaurant on the edge of downtown, a place with exposed brick walls and white tablecloths. String lights glimmered overhead, and laughter filled the space. She sat at a table near the window, trying to fade into the background, sipping sparkling water and practicing how to smile when people asked her how she was doing. That was when she noticed the man sitting at the next table. He was dressed simply in a charcoal suit, no tie, and he looked at ease in a way that drew her attention without meaning to. His hair was dark and neatly combed, and when he smiled at the waiter, there was a gentleness in it. Their eyes met by accident. He inclined his head politely before returning to his meal. For the rest of the evening, she found herself stealing glances at him. It wasn't until dessert was served that he turned and spoke. "You look like you're ready to escape," he said lightly, a hint of amusement in his voice. She flushed, caught off guard. "I suppose I am," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've been in a place like this." He nodded, as though he understood something unspoken. "I'm Mark," he said, extending his hand across the space between their tables. "Bethany." His grip was warm but not too firm. He didn't hold on too long, didn't let the moment stretch into awkwardness. For the rest of the evening, they spoke quietly over the flicker of candles. He didn't ask why she seemed uncomfortable. He didn't press her to explain herself. He simply listened when she chose to speak. When the reception ended, he walked her to her car. "If you'd ever like to have coffee, I'd enjoy that," he said. She hesitated, then surprised herself by nodding. Their first meeting for coffee was cautious. She picked a cafe halfway between their neighborhoods, the kind with a bright interior and wide windows so everything felt open and safe. Mark was there before her, reading something on his phone. When he saw her, he stood and smiled in a way that wasn't expectant, only welcoming. They spoke for over an hour. She told him about her work, her plans to finish her certification. He told her about his real estate business, how he'd started it from nothing and was proud to see it growing. Even when the conversation paused, it never felt forced. It took her weeks to trust that he didn't have some hidden motive. She kept waiting for a moment when he would turn impatient or dismissive. the way Tom had in those last years. But Mark never did. He didn't push her to open up, only listened when she chose to. Eventually, she told him about her marriage. "I was married before," she said one evening, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "It ended badly. He gambled. A lot. It ruined everything." Mark was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said finally. "No one deserves to have their trust broken like that." That was all. No pity. No judgment. Just quiet understanding. When she got home that night, she realized her heart wasn't racing in panic. She felt lighter. A year later, on an early spring morning, Mark took her to breakfast at a little diner with blue vinyl booths. After their plates were cleared, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring with a single diamond, modest and elegant. "I know your heart has been through a lot," he said softly, "but I would be honored if you'd let me take care of it. If you'd let me be your family." Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She hadn't thought she would ever say yes again. But she did. When they married, it was in a small ceremony with only her parents, his parents, and a handful of close friends. She wore a simple ivory dress, and when she looked into Mark's eyes as they exchanged vows, she felt a hope she had thought was lost forever. In the first months of marriage, she woke every morning to find he had already brewed coffee, sometimes with a note folded beside the mug. "You make me believe in happiness." On weekends, they took long walks through Maplewood, stopping to admire the old Victorian houses or browse the stalls at the farmer's market. He never tired of praising her. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever met," he would say, kissing her temple. "You deserve everything good." In those days, she truly believed she had found the life she deserved. Half a year into their marriage, Mark began working later. At first, it was just once a week. Then twice. Then 3 times. "There's a big project coming up," he explained when she asked. "Lots of negotiations. It should be done soon." She nodded, telling herself it was normal. Real estate was a demanding business. But when he came home late, she sometimes caught the faintest whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his collar. A sweet, floral scent she didn't own. She never accused him. She couldn't bear the thought of another betrayal. Instead, she buried the worry deep inside, convincing herself that if she waited patiently, it would pass. On a bright Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Mark surprised her by saying he wanted to spend the entire day together. "I've been neglecting you," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Let me make it up to you." They drove to the supermarket together, parking beneath the golden trees. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of that early happiness return. He insisted she pick out everything she liked: vegetables, spices, a bottle of wine. "I just want to spoil you today," he said, smiling. She was selecting meat for roast beef when she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck, as if someone were watching her. She turned and nearly dropped the package in her hands. Tom stood 10 meters away, studying the labels on a frozen pizza box. His hair was shorter than she remembered. He looked thinner, older, but his profile was unmistakable. Her heart thudded so loudly she felt sure Mark could hear it. She considered pretending she hadn't seen him, but something inside her refused to hide. "Mark, will you wait here? I see someone I know." "Of course," he replied easily. She walked toward Tom slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. When he turned and saw her, surprise crossed his face, followed by something like regret. "Bethany," he said, his voice low. "It's been so long." "It has," she murmured, her throat tight. She asked how he was, whether he was well. He nodded. "I've been in treatment for 5 years. I'm clean now. Working. Living a normal life." Relief and sadness twisted together inside her. "I'm glad," she whispered. Then Mark appeared at her side, carrying a bag of meat. "Everything okay?" he asked with a polite smile. She turned, about to introduce them. But Tom's face went utterly white. His eyes locked on Mark's, and something terrible passed over his expression. Fear so deep it looked like horror. "Tom," she said, alarmed. He didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his stride turning into a near run as he pushed past other shoppers. Mark looked after him, puzzled. "Old friend?" he asked. "My ex-husband," she said quietly. Mark shrugged. Some men can't handle that sort of thing. But her stomach was cold with dread. They finished shopping in an uneasy quiet. Bethany tried to push aside the memory of Tom's face, how all the color had drained from it when he looked at Mark. She told herself he must have been shocked to see her married again. That had to be all. As they paid at the register, her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She didn't check it right away, but when they reached the car and she settled into the passenger seat, she pulled it out. There was a message from an unknown number. "Divorce immediately. Your husband is." The text ended mid-sentence. Her chest tightened. She read it over and over, willing the rest of the message to appear, but it remained cut off. "What is it?" Mark asked as he turned the key in the ignition. "Just a wrong number," she lied, shoving the phone deep into her bag. But her hands were trembling, and her mouth had gone dry. The drive home felt endless. Mark talked about their plans for dinner, about a movie he wanted to watch. But she only nodded and pretended to listen. Her thoughts were a storm of confusion and fear. That night, after Mark fell asleep, she lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tom's face, white as a sheet, mouth opening as if to speak before he'd turned and fled. Her phone vibrated again just after midnight. With shaking hands, she unlocked it. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Café Luna on Main Street. I have something important to tell you about your life. Please trust me." Tom, the message was longer, clear, unmistakable. For a long time, she didn't move. She felt as if her heart was being squeezed in a fist. She had not spoken to Tom in a decade. What could he possibly know that would make him write words like this? Beside her, Mark shifted in his sleep, mumbling something she couldn't understand. She turned to look at him, studying the familiar lines of his face. He looked the same as he always did, calm, handsome, tired from work. But the unease refused to leave her. She made a decision in the dark. Tomorrow, she would meet Tom. The next morning, she prepared carefully. She told Mark she was meeting an old friend from her bookkeeping classes. The lie made her stomach churn, but she didn't know what else to do. If she told him she was going to see Tom, he would have questions she couldn't answer. He only kissed her cheek and told her to enjoy herself. Outside, the sky was the color of old silver. A wind tugged at the hem of her coat as she walked down Main Street, past shop windows filled with autumn decorations. Café Luna was a small place she used to visit years before. Its wooden sign creaked as she pulled open the door, and the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her like a memory. Tom was already there, sitting alone at a corner table. When he looked up and saw her, something like relief softened his expression. "Bethany," he said, standing halfway, then sinking back down as if unsure whether she'd allow him to hug her. She sat opposite him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry about yesterday," Tom began. His voice was low and steady, different from the shaky tone she remembered. "Seeing him, I wasn't prepared. I panicked." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you react like that?" Tom took a slow breath. "Because that man, Mark Davis, he isn't who you think he is." Her stomach turned over. "I know this sounds insane," he went on quickly, before she could interrupt. But I'm begging you to listen to everything before you decide I'm lying. She nodded once. Tom laced his fingers together and stared down at them. Years ago, before I met you, I worked in an engineering firm. There was a guy in sales. He called himself Mark Davis. He was older than me, charismatic. Everybody liked him. He invited me to play poker with some of his friends. Small stakes, just for fun, he said. He looked up, his eyes hollow. That's how it started. The poker games. The horse races. The bigger bets. It got out of control before I realized what was happening. Bethany's hands were clenched in her lap. You never told me that, she whispered. I didn't remember, Tom said, voice cracking. I swear. I thought it was my own weakness. But after years of treatment, when I started to really examine what happened, it all came back. She felt the world tilting beneath her. You're telling me Mark is the one who... Yes, Tom said, cutting her off. He targeted me. He befriended me, made me trust him, and set me up to fail. He was part of an illegal gambling ring. The games were rigged so I'd lose everything. Bethany felt sick. Tom reached into his bag and pulled out a thick file folder. I didn't want to believe it either, he said. But I hired a private investigator 5 years ago. This is everything he found. She opened the folder with hands that barely felt real. Inside were photographs. Mark sitting with unfamiliar men, shaking hands with people whose faces were blurred in her memory but who now made her blood run cold. There were documents with Mark's name. Only it wasn't Mark Davis. Michael Lazarus. Her eyes jumped across paragraphs of text she couldn't fully process. Accounts of marriage fraud. Testimonies from women in other states. Records of money laundering. References to brothels. I'm sorry, Tom whispered. I should have come to you sooner. But I kept hoping I was wrong. That it was some horrible coincidence. Yesterday, when I saw him next to you, I knew. Bethany closed the file and pressed her palm over her mouth. I don't understand, she rasped. Why would he? He does the same thing every time, Tom said. He ruins the husband financially. Then he approaches the woman. Pretends to be supportive, dependable. He marries her, gains access to her assets, then forces her into debt so she has no way out. She felt as if she were floating outside her own body. He's already started, Tom added, voice hoarse. He's been meeting with people, planning to propose an investment to you. Real estate, he'll call it. He'll convince you to sign paperwork you don't understand. And when you can't repay, you'll be trapped. Bethany covered her face with both hands. Her chest felt too tight to breathe. After a long time, she lowered them and whispered, Why are you doing this? After everything. Tom swallowed hard. Because I failed you once. I won't stand by and let someone else destroy you. The cafe felt too small, the air too thin. She closed her eyes and tried to steady herself. But nothing worked. If what you're saying is true, why hasn't he been arrested? She asked finally. He's careful, Tom said. He changes identities. He never leaves evidence behind. But this, he tapped the file. This is enough if you help. Your testimony can connect everything. She thought of Mark's hand on her cheek, the way he kissed her forehead in the mornings. All of it a lie. What do you want me to do? She asked dully. Go home, Tom said. Don't let him know you suspect anything. Move anything valuable. Documents, money, somewhere safe. Then meet me tomorrow morning. We'll take this to the police. Bethany didn't remember leaving the cafe. She didn't remember the walk back to her car. She only knew that by the time she reached her driveway, the sun was low in the sky, and she felt like a stranger in her own life. Mark was waiting in the living room, a warm smile on his face. You're home, he said. rising to greet her. "Did you have a good time?" She forced herself to nod. But as he kissed her cheek, she wondered if he could feel how her heart had turned to ice. She could hardly sleep. All through the night, Bethany lay on her side, her back turned to Mark, her eyes wide open in the darkness. He slept soundly beside her, breathing slow and even, as though there were nothing in the world he feared, as though he had not built their life together on lies. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the file Tom had given her. Photographs of Mark in shadowy rooms with men whose faces looked as dangerous as they did. Familiar. Statements from women who had trusted him, who had loved him, who had been used and discarded. She wanted to deny it, wanted to find some flaw in the evidence that would make it all untrue. But even as she lay there, some quiet part of her, the part she had tried for so long to ignore, whispered that she had always known something was wrong. She remembered the scent of perfume she didn't own, the way he always had an explanation ready, the way he so skillfully turned her doubts into guilt. "You deserve everything good." She wondered how many times he had said those same words to other women. Before dawn, she slipped out of bed and stood at the kitchen counter, gripping the edge with both hands until her knuckles went white. If she confronted him now, she would be alone. She would have no proof once he destroyed the file. So she forced herself to act normal. She made coffee. She pretended to smile. "I have a long day," Mark told her as he picked up his keys. "I might be late again tonight." "Take care," she said, amazed that her voice didn't crack. He leaned in to kiss her. She held perfectly still. When he was gone, she finally allowed herself to cry. By 8 a.m., she had packed everything important. Her birth certificate, her checkbook, her laptop. She put them in a tote bag and locked it in the trunk of her car. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Are you ready?" It was Tom. She took a breath that felt like it would tear her lungs apart. "Yes, I'm coming." She drove to the same cafe where they had met the day before. Tom was waiting outside, pacing. When he saw her pull in, he hurried over and opened the passenger door. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice gentle. "No," she whispered. "But I'm here. That's enough." She nodded. Together, they drove to the police station. The station smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. A detective with a kind face led them into a small interview room. The walls were painted a dull cream, and a tape recorder sat on the table between them. "Take your time," the detective said. "Start wherever you need to." Her hands shook as she began. She told him everything. How she'd met Mark, how he'd made her feel safe, how he'd slowly become more distant, how she'd ignored her own instincts because she wanted so badly to believe him. She handed over the file Tom had given her. When she finished, there was a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, the detective nodded. "We've suspected for years that someone was moving between states, committing this kind of fraud. This is the first time we've had enough evidence to act." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice thin. "We'll need you to cooperate with the arrest." "He can't know we're coming." She closed her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes." That evening, she went home as if nothing had changed. Mark was sitting on the couch, flipping through paperwork. He looked up and smiled. "How was your day?" "It was fine," she said. She wondered if he could see how brittle her calm had become. "Dinner?" he asked. "I'm not very hungry," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged and turned his attention back to his documents. Later that night, she lay awake again, listening for any sign that he suspected her. But he never stirred. At dawn, her phone buzzed. "It's time." She watched from the porch as two unmarked cars pulled up to the curb. Plainclothes officers stepped out, their movements quick but unhurried. Mark appeared at the door behind her, frowning. "What's going on?" She turned to face him. I know everything, she said quietly. His eyes went flat and cold in a way she had never seen. What are you talking about? Your name isn't Mark Davis, she whispered. It's Michael Lazarus. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the words never came. The officers stepped into the yard. Michael Lazarus. One of them called in a steady voice. You are under arrest. Mark didn't look at them. He kept staring at her, something dark flickering across his face. Fury, maybe, or something worse. Then they were putting his hands behind his back, reading him his rights, leading him away. She stood frozen on the porch as the cars pulled away. Only when they disappeared did she realize she was crying. The months that followed were a blur of interviews, depositions, and court filings. Every time she thought she couldn't bear to relive it, she reminded herself of the women in those reports. The ones who had lost everything. The ones who hadn't survived. Tom was there for every hearing. He never tried to tell her how to feel. He only sat beside her, a quiet presence who never judged. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. Victims came from across the country to testify. Some were so shaken they had to be helped to the witness stand. Bethany was among the last to speak. She took the stand and told the court about the man she thought she'd married. About the mornings when she'd believed she was safe. About the nights when she'd wondered if she was imagining everything. When she stepped down, she felt hollow but lighter. On the final day, the judge's voice echoed through the silent room. For the crimes of marriage fraud, forced prostitution, and organized criminal conspiracy, I sentence you to life imprisonment. Mark didn't look at her. She never saw him again. When it was over, she sold the house where she had once believed she was loved. She moved into a small apartment near the victim support center where she began volunteering. Each week, she met women who reminded her of herself, women who had loved the wrong person, who carried shame that didn't belong to them. She told them the same thing she wished someone had told her years before. It's not your fault. Tom continued his own recovery, working as a counselor for others with addiction. They never returned to being a couple. But they became something different. Two people bound by respect, by gratitude, by the knowledge that sometimes even the worst wounds could heal. One evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, Bethany sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from a woman she'd helped testify. Thank you for giving me courage. Because of you, I'm free. Bethany set the phone down and let her eyes fill with tears. She thought of who she'd been 10 years ago. A woman who believed her life had ended the day she signed those divorce papers. She thought of who she was now. Not a victim. Not even just a survivor. Someone who had transformed her pain into something stronger. She picked up her pen and opened her journal. The past taught me who I am. The future is still mine. Outside her window, the first stars appeared. She knew she would never stop helping other women find their way back to themselves. And she knew, finally, that no lie, no matter how skillfully told, could ever again steal her worth.